As Daniel was saying, this is research really from a postdoc fellowship. That it was a part-time position at Western Sydney University, funded by Seedbox. And it's been a leap for me, so there's not going to be so much theory of environmental humanities here. My PhD was in social enterprise and community development. So what I'm trying to do is bring that into contact with aspects of environmental humanities, but I don't claim to be a huge theorist in that area. Today I'm going to be talking about one NGO in Cambodia and innovations in community managed drinking water in the context of sustainable development goals, in the context of rural development, and in the context of issues like patron-client relationships, relationships with plastic, and also the responsibilities of governments in terms of providing clean water to the population of Cambodia. Let's say, okay, Cambodia has abundant fresh water, including the Mekong River, the Tonle Sap Lake, the largest freshwater lake in Southeast Asia. Despite these resources, there's a big disparity in water infrastructure and the quality of water in urban and rural areas. The United Nations data shows that piped water networks reach 70% of the urban population, rising to 96% of the population of the capital Phnom Penh. But just 8% of the population in rural areas have a piped supply network, and 30% rely on water sources providing no protection against contamination. This includes surface water taken directly from lakes, ponds and rivers. It's a critical issue in Cambodia. Waterborne disease is the leading cause of infant rural mortality, but meanwhile the government's budget for water infrastructure in rural Cambodia countrywide is less than $1 million a year. Less than $1 million a year for the entirety of rural Cambodia's water infrastructure is allocated by the government budget. One response to this problem comes from an NGO called Tuk Saat 1001. Tuk Saat in Khmer language, the main language of Cambodia, means clean water. And this NGO works with the Ministry of Rural Development to achieve the Sustainable Development Goal Target 6.1 related to clean drinking water for all. Tuk Saat build water refill kiosks in rural villages. These kiosks are funded by USAID, French Development Agency, Swiss Red Cross, UNICEF. Each kiosk costs about $33,000 to build and implement. They use pumps or boreholes to draw in local water sources that is unfit for drinking. The water is treated in the kiosk, then decanted into 20-litre polyethylene tetraphthalate or PET plastic bottles and delivered directly to villagers' houses using a motorised cart. Once a kiosk is operational, it becomes a franchised business. The CEO of Tuk Saat calls each kiosk a micro-social enterprise. They hire a kiosk operator that they refer to as a water entrepreneur, who in turn hires at least 2 other assistants to help with water treatment, filling bottles, cleaning bottles, and doing the deliveries. The water product from the kiosks is known across Cambodia as Owi bottled water brand. It's the cheapest 20-litre bottled drinking water in Cambodia, costing about 30% of the usual price for a 20-litre bottle from a private company. It's been hugely successful. Now 218 kiosks are operating nationwide, selling 10 million litres of OWE per month. The kiosks generate salaries for workers, and 20% of the sales revenue each month is paid to Tuk Saat NGO for services including monthly water testing and ongoing business and technical support. This is the inside of the kiosk where you can see some of the technology being used. Behind the wall, a preliminary treatment process involves pre-filtration, percolation, further sand filtration, and activated carbon to improve the water colour and the odour. Treatment then moves on to 4 more filters to get pollution particles down to 1 part per million before the remaining bacteria is killed with ultraviolet rays. The water conforms to World Health Organization standards, and it is tested every month in one of Tuxat's 3 regional laboratories. So we can say that bottled water in international development has not always been looked on favourably. Piped water supply networks and tube wells and rainwater harvesting were traditionally viewed as more cost-effective solutions, especially by the United Nations agencies. Bottled water was seen as a temporary solution at best, and especially unsuitable for the poor in more remote and rural places, mainly due to the logistical problems. But bottled water has since been revalued. By 2017, UNICEF and the World Health Organization are now saying that bottled water is suited as a primary supply of household drinking water in poor countries, so long as the households have other sources that they can use for bathing, washing clothes and cooking. One provocation for this more open-minded approach came in 2010 when the United Nations declared the human right to water. They ratified the human right to water without saying how it should be achieved or how it should not be achieved. So there's some political criticism of the right to water in that respect. The other impetus, without doubt, was the Sustainable Development Target and Target 6.1, and that has really, I think, compounded the approach which now accepts bottled water as a solution. The upgrading of bottled water has provoked a lot of political literature of late. There is concern that bottled water consumption by the poor is really a reflection of uneven choices. These are uneven choices embedded in historic social relations that give affluent communities more privileges. Bottled water tends to be framed through community choice. Gay Hawkins' literature has looked at bottled water markets. It's analysed academically through business and psychology rather than political ecology traditionally. The World Bank look at bottled water markets in this context of choice. But when they do so, as Kuy and Water show, the uneven choices of the poor are sidelined in this narrative. Some see the growth of bottled water as nothing less than a dereliction of duty by governments. In the process of meeting their obligations without making sufficient budgetary investments, governments are handing water governance to unethical private companies that are appropriating superior freshwater resources on unprecedented scales, separating water from its natural flowing state and mining it mercilessly. Taking water scarcity as socially constructed, and taking water scarcity as a key aspect of water insecurity, Raul Pachacavega asks, how is an industry that makes money from packaging a scarce resource compatible with the human right to water? In my work, I'm trying to avoid polarizing narratives. Is bottling water and selling it always antithetical to the human right to water? What about considering social entrepreneurship and the roles this plays in developing alternative pro-social business models? Following Michael Colon, I don't see the marketization of water as a bad thing necessarily. Markets solve problems when they organize people and resources in new ways. Markets can create political and social value as well as economic value. I'm particularly concerned with the processes involved in social entrepreneurship, the impacts on communities, and mobilize relevant literature accordingly. When underused resources, or what is sometimes called antagonistic, difficult to use resources, are being brought into public use in new ways, then they become valued as assets, a form of bricolage, creating social value that would not exist otherwise. With Tuxat, we can say that bringing undrinkable surface water into public use is one form of social value, doing exactly that. And it stands in contrast to the types of companies that are appropriating superior freshwater resources and excluding communities from them. Creating a facility that would not exist otherwise is also another way of creating social value. Without the kiosks, bottled water would still be available for most communities, but it would be more expensive. And the facility that delivers their water would not belong to the community. In the Tuxat model, each kiosk is built on public land instead of private land to embed the sense of community ownership. Good governance committees are also established to help out. Furthermore, when people feel involved in the co-management of facilities and enterprise, this can enhance community cohesion and it can enhance their pride in assets. Co-management means processes of ethical deliberation necessarily. In theory, this also helps communities to sense other post-capitalist possibilities for enterprise. These facilities can act as markers that open up their ways of thinking to other forms of enterprise that also might transcend capitalism. My research question is, how can social entrepreneurship approach a problem like water distribution? What subjectivities emerge in this process? What are the political tensions? I visited 2 Owi kiosks in East Cambodia in Kampong Cham. One is classified by Tuxat as a Tier 1 kiosk. This means it easily exceeds its sales targets. This is a kiosk that was commissioned because of high arsenic contamination in the groundwater, which is a naturally occurring problem in some of the Mekong River Basin areas. Without the kiosk, the villagers there tended to drink water from the Mekong River before, although many do harvest rainwater during the raining season. The other kiosk is categorized as a Tier 3 kiosk. The Tier 3 kiosk is continually failing to make its basic sales targets of 60 bottles sold a day. The kiosk was commissioned by UNICEF on account of inadequate water infrastructure and many villagers drinking raw water from community ponds. It does seem that the relative success of the TK1 successful and TK3 less successful kiosk might have much to do with the mindset of the entrepreneur in each instance. The more successful entrepreneur says that he welcomes competing enterprises. They make his team work harder. He also downplays threats and can turn them into opportunities. For instance, 4 years after the kiosk was set up, a chlorinated pipe supply network arrived locally. Water sales have since fallen by 30% in the dry season, but he remains optimistic that most villagers only really want piped water for cooking and washing. Boiling piped water before drinking it is inconvenient compared to the bottle, and he feels that if his team works hard, they will continue to make money, and they do. It's still a profitable kiosk. But he also finally incorporated the benefits of the private supply into his own business. He connected the piped supply to his own kiosk. So they're no longer taking the surface water, they're actually taking the piped supply and cleaning it up a bit more and selling it on in bottles. Which doesn't sound ideal, but for him it makes sense. It raises the cost per unit of his water production, but without having to pump the water from the Mekong River, he can do more delivery rounds. He's selling the water to businesses in the locality now, microfinance institutions. So this guy is a really great entrepreneur, and he turns problems into solutions. In contrast, the TK3 entrepreneur identifies the other private bottled water companies that were there before his kiosk as the main reason why his kiosk is failing. He feels he can't compete with them. They have better water sources further away. His water has a bad odor and it smells. Customers will not switch to his water despite the lower price. While the entrepreneurial dispositions of the two kiosk operators differs considerably, their ethical subjectivities, however, do seem similar. And I think this may have something to do with the way that Tuxat operate and promote ethical subjectivities of their entrepreneurs. According to the CEO, there are more successful kiosks selling much more water than the less successful ones, but reporting lower profits than the less successful ones. Lower net profits after the operating costs, including salaries. And for Tuxat, this isn't a problem. He said, the only thing that matters, we don't care what their salaries are, that's their business. The only thing that carries this model is that they're committed, they work hard, and they are motivated. So when Tuxat allow the kiosk operators to autonomously set their wages and deliberate their wages, they are fostering, in my view, ethical economic subjectivities. As Gibson Graham writes, surplus labour is never predefined. Instead, it is established relationally at the moment of surplus appropriation itself. Once the kiosk workers' basic needs are met, they remain morally committed to providing water to the villages, and some of the surplus that they produce goes into contributing towards community development funds. They are also obliged to provide free water to the local school classrooms. They take this very seriously. This model, in my view, fosters entrepreneurial subjectivities that stand in strong contrast to the kind of private water companies that the political ecology literature is talking about. Both of the entrepreneurs talk about Buddhist practices and beliefs in somewhat different ways. The successful entrepreneur strongly feels that he is making merit, doing Buddhist merit making by providing water. The less successful one talks about integrity and honesty and comes back to the bad quality of his water and how he wouldn't lie about it. One key difference is that the less successful entrepreneur gives away free water to villagers. He said, if they can't afford to pay it, I'll give it on credit, and I know that they'll never pay for it back. The more successful entrepreneur would never do that. He said, A, it sets a bad example for my business, and B, everyone can afford it if they want to. So what I do see is that their ethical subjectivity is strongly determined in some ways, in nuanced ways, by their business dispositions. Having shown that the entrepreneurial mindsets differ and that they matter, I argue it's wrong to make this the central reason for the relative success and failure of each kiosk. I take issue then with the Tuxat regional business manager, for example, who strongly blames the mindset of the less successful entrepreneur and says that we only work with him because we can't find someone else. A key factor is the path-dependent origins of each kiosk. The TK1 kiosk emerged from years of community mobilisation amongst villagers demanding a solution because of the arsenic in the groundwater. The villagers there are strongly invested in the success of the kiosk. They see it as their community water, in their own words. They also speak of Buddhist merit gained by the kiosk entrepreneur. In group discussions, they do resist the notion that the pipe supply is a good source. They don't trust it like OE. Female villagers in a group discussion said that the kiosk is a permanent solution, or in one woman's words, it is the last solution to the problem that we had. She explains, I gave my stamp, my thumb, every year we requested this. How can we ask for another drinking water now? In contrast, the TK3 less successful kiosk was initiated through the actions of a former commune chief acting alone. He even took out loans in his own name to pay for the preparatory work to get the boreholes driven. After what seems to have been a top-down process without much community engagement with the kiosk remains constrained today. Numerous villagers said they don't see the difference between it and any other private bottled water enterprise. Several complain that the kiosk does not give them a piped supply. They simply see the kiosk as a second-rate solution to their problems and a further reflection of their marginalised status. I have spoken about the human relations with water and the water kiosks so far, but another issue that can't go without comment is the plastic bottle. In Cambodia, the 20-litre plastic bottle cannot be easily recycled, and certainly in rural areas it can't be recycled at all. No waste pickers will take them. 2 companies are doing recycling in the capital Phnom Penh, but they only recycle plastic bottles gathered there. The logistics prohibit them getting them from rural areas. With nowhere else to go, these water bottles are turning into buckets and plant pots in the villages. The CEO talks about past competitions to innovate uses, saying someone made a fan out of the plastic bottle once. The successful entrepreneur sells plastic bottles, sometimes on an 8 for the price of 5 promotion. At the back of the less successful kiosk, the bottles are mounting up, and I really should have had a picture of that. The operator is trying to keep the plastic bottles in use as long as possible because they're piling up. And I ask him, how do you know when a plastic bottle can't be refilled anymore? What's the point at which you make that decision that this bottle can't be refilled? And he said, oh, it's when I can no longer glue them together again after they get cracked. So I was like, wow, you are sending plastic bottled water out into the villages that is glued back together. One villager in the successful commune, around the successful kiosk, also made a quite interesting point to me. He was concerned about the plastic bottles turning into buckets and plant pots. What he was saying is that it impacts on the way we perceive the water itself. That it impacts on the quality of the water in our own eyes to see the bottle being diminished. So we can say that the bottles not only have effects as they change the landscape and the way people live with plastic, with buckets and plant pots, they also relate to the way people perceive the quality of drinking water and its sustainability. Conclusion. Community managed water enterprise is political, but not in the way set out by other literature. While bottled water has been approached through a political lens of uneven development and weak regulation, the bottled water kiosk infrastructure in Cambodia is, in my view, located within a framework of patron politics that can determine how well communities mobilize. In the TK1 commune, the more successful commune, the commune chief is very well connected to the ruling party. Her connections brought Ministry of Rural Development officials to the area to discuss water problems. They also bought a new highway just before local elections. And within 6 months of the new highway, followed a pipe supply network from a private company. Another concern is, in my view, the systematic act of kiosk replication from one commune to another. Systemic social entrepreneurship and social innovation is, by definition, dependent on the capacity for its replication. This equates to the very legitimacy of social entrepreneurship itself. But I would say a post-political blueprint replication practiced without consideration for circumstance will cause further kiosk failures that might further reinforce some communities' marginalisation. I'm inclined here to think of Walter Benjamin. What would he say about the water kiosk? What constitutes the water kiosk as a work of art? Is it the original prototype, the uniquely fitted to context? Or is it the work of, or the technique of mechanical reproduction? The legitimacy of social entrepreneurship depends on mechanical reproduction. That is, in its essence, the art of social entrepreneurship and social innovation. Not the prototype, but the process, the completed process that allows for replication. But in this way, I would say it becomes a political problem, not so much because governments are abdicating their duty to large corporations, but with this model, the aura of the original kiosk, that original idea that fits its context, is lost because the nature of human experience that is central to community resource management is being lost as well. Okay, thank you.